Welcome to Paranormal Pages. Let's get straight into the True Scary Stories compilation. Story 1. Whispering Shadows. When I moved into the old Victorian house on the outskirts of town, I was looking for a fresh start. The paint was peeling, the floorboards creaked with every step, and the windows had long since forgotten how to shine. It was perfect. It was the kind of place where a person could lose themselves, and that's exactly what I intended to do. My brother's death had left a gaping hole in my life, a wound that refused to heal. People kept telling me that time would make it better, but they didn't understand. They couldn't. Ben and I had been inseparable. Losing him was like losing a part of myself. That's why, when I first heard the whispers, I didn't think much of it. Grief can play tricks on the mind. The first night in the house, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the night. The wind howled through the trees, and the branches scraped against the windows like skeletal fingers. It was then I heard it, a soft, almost imperceptible whisper. "Ben," it said, as if the house itself was speaking to me. I sat up, my heart pounding. "Who's there?" I called out, but there was only silence. The whispers grew more frequent over the next few days. At first, they were just vague murmurs, but soon they became clearer, more distinct. It was always Ben's name, spoken in a voice that was eerily familiar yet impossible to place. I tried to ignore it, to tell myself it was just the house settling, or the wind playing tricks on me, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. One evening, as I was unpacking a box of Ben's things, the whispers grew louder. "Ben," the voice said again, but this time it added something more. "Secrets." I froze, my hands trembling. How could this be happening? Ben's secrets were buried with him. No one else knew. Determined to get to the bottom of this, I began researching the house's history. It turned out that the house had once belonged to a family that had experienced a series of tragic events. The father had gone mad, driven by the whispers that filled the house, and had taken his own life. The rest of the family fled, leaving the house abandoned for decades. It was said to be haunted, but I hadn't believed in such things, until now. One night, as I was sitting in the living room, the whispers began again. This time, they were more insistent, more urgent. "Ben," the voice called, and then, secrets, hidden, truth. I followed the sound, my heart pounding in my chest, to the hallway outside my bedroom. "Hey! Subscribe for more true scary stories." There, standing in the dim light, was a shadowy figure. I gasped, my breath catching in my throat. The figure was tall and thin, with hollow eyes that seemed to stare right through me. "Who are you?" I whispered, my voice trembling. The figure didn't respond, but the whispers grew louder, more desperate. "Ben's secrets," it said, and then, "find them." I knew then that I couldn't ignore the whispers any longer. Whatever was haunting this house knew something about my brother, something I needed to uncover. I had to find out the truth, no matter how terrifying it might be. As I stood there, staring into the hollow eyes of the ghostly figure, I made a promise to myself. I would uncover Ben's secrets, and I would put an end to the whispers once and for all. Determined to uncover the truth behind the whispers, I started delving into the house's history. Every creak of the floorboards seemed to echo with the past, each gust of wind through the broken windows whispered secrets long buried. Armed with old documents and faded photographs, I began to piece together the story of the house and its former inhabitants. The diary I found in the attic was my first real clue. Its pages, yellowed with age, were filled with the ramblings of Margaret Evans, the wife of the man who had gone mad. Her handwriting was frantic, her words a desperate plea for help. "The shadows speak," she wrote. "They tell me things only I can hear. They say my husband is not to blame. They say the house is cursed." My fingers trembled as I read, the weight of her words pressing down on me. The more I read, the more I realized that the whispers were not just in my head, they were a part of this house's dark legacy. As days turned into nights, the whispers grew more insistent. They seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once. "Secrets. Ben. Find the truth." I felt like I was being pulled into a vortex of the past, the boundaries between reality and the supernatural blurring. The air in the hallway was colder now, and the shadows seemed to move with a life of their own. Every time I turned a corner, I half expected to see Ben standing there, his eyes filled with the same fear that gripped me. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I decided to explore the cellar. The old door creaked open, and the musty smell of damp earth and decay hit me like a wall. The narrow stairs led me down into darkness, and the only light was from the flickering flashlight in my hand. As I reached the bottom, the whispers became louder, more urgent. "The truth is here," they hissed. My heart pounded in my chest, and I stepped forward, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the gloom. In the far corner of the cellar, I found an old chest, its lock rusted and corroded. With a surge of adrenaline, I pried it open. Inside, amidst a jumble of old clothes and forgotten relics, was a small, ornate box. I lifted the lid, and the contents sent a chill down my spine, a collection of old letters and a photograph of my brother Ben, smiling with a group of people I didn't recognize. The letters were dated just before Ben's death, written by a woman named Emily, who spoke of strange occurrences, unsettling dreams, and a growing sense of dread. "He knows something," one letter read, "something that should stay buried." As I read the letters, the room seemed to close in on me. The shadows danced around the cellar, and the whispers became a cacophony of voices. Ben, secrets, the truth. It was then that I noticed the photograph in my hand. It was different. The eyes of the people in the photograph were not just staring at the camera, they were looking at me, their expressions filled with sorrow and fear. Among them, Ben stood, his eyes wide with terror, and I realized with a jolt that the truth I was seeking was not just in the past, but right here, in this house, in these shadows. The final letter was a scream in ink, a frantic plea for help from Emily to Ben. "The shadows are coming for you," she wrote. "They know your secrets, and they will not rest until they are free." My hands shook as I read the last words. Ben had known something terrible, something he had tried to bury deep within himself. The house, the whispers, they were all part of a greater puzzle, one that I was now a part of. Suddenly, the cellar door slammed shut behind me, plunging me into darkness. The whispers turned into a roar, and the shadows seemed to reach out, grasping at my feet. I fumbled for my flashlight, the beam cutting through the blackness, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was there, just out of sight, watching, waiting. As I turned, I saw it, a shadowy figure, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. It wasn't just a part of the house, it was the house itself, a living, breathing entity that thrived on fear and secrets. The figure in the cellar moved closer, its form shifting and flickering like a candle flame caught in a breeze. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, and I felt a cold hand brush against my cheek. "Ben's secrets," the voice said, clearer now than ever before. "You must know." I stumbled back, nearly dropping the flashlight, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Summoning every ounce of courage I had left, I forced myself to stand my ground. "What do you want from me?" I demanded, my voice trembling but defiant. The figure paused, as if considering my question, and then spoke again, this time in a voice that was eerily familiar. It was Ben's voice. "Look in the attic," it whispered. "Find the box." And then, as quickly as it had appeared, the figure dissolved into the shadows, leaving me alone in the suffocating darkness of the cellar. My legs felt like jelly, but I managed to climb the stairs and make my way back to the main part of the house, my mind racing with questions and fear. The attic. It had to be the final piece of the puzzle. I climbed the creaky stairs, each step echoing in the stillness of the house. The attic door groaned open, and the smell of dust and decay filled my nostrils. The dim light from my flashlight revealed a cluttered space filled with old furniture, broken toys, and forgotten memories. I began to search, pushing aside boxes and cobwebs, until I found it, a small, unassuming wooden box tucked away in a corner. With trembling hands, I opened the box and found a collection of old cassette tapes. The labels were faded, but one stood out, Ben's Secrets. My heart pounded as I placed the tape in an old player I found nearby and pressed play. The tape crackled to life, and Ben's voice filled the room. "To whoever finds this," he began, his voice strained and fearful, "I need you to understand what happened to me, what I discovered." He spoke of a group of people who had lived in the house long before the Evans family, a secret society obsessed with the supernatural. They had performed dark rituals, attempting to communicate with the dead and unlock the mysteries of the afterlife. Their leader, a man named Victor, had become consumed by his quest for power, and in his madness, he had bound the spirits of the dead to the house, creating a prison for their tormented souls. "I found their records," Ben continued, his voice trembling. "I found the evidence of what they did." But before I could reveal the truth, the whispers started. They knew I was close. They wouldn't let me leave. They wouldn't let me live. The tape ended with a chilling silence, and I realized with a jolt that Ben's death had not been an accident. He had been silenced by the very spirits he sought to expose. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. The whispers, the shadows, they were all part of a dark legacy, a curse that had claimed my brother and now sought to claim me. I knew I had to do something, to put an end to this nightmare once and for all. But how? How could I fight something that wasn't even alive? As I stood there, lost in thought, the attic door slammed shut, and the temperature plummeted. The whispers rose to a deafening roar, and the shadows began to move, coalescing into the form of the figure I had seen in the cellar. It reached out, its hand icy cold as it grasped my wrist. "You must finish what Ben started," it said, its voice a chorus of anguished souls. "You must set us free." Fear clawed at my heart, but I knew there was no turning back. I had to find a way to break the curse, to free the spirits trapped in this house and avenge my brother's death. As the figure faded into the shadows once more, I felt a strange sense of resolve. I would uncover the final secrets, I would confront the darkness, and I would put an end to the whispers that haunted this house. Determined to end the curse and free the trapped souls, I returned to the cellar, clutching the box of tapes and the diary of Margaret Evans. The cellar door loomed before me, an ominous reminder of the secrets it held. I took a deep breath, pushed it open, and descended into the darkness once more, feeling the weight of generations of suffering pressing down on me. I set up the cassette player on an old table and began playing the tapes one by one, listening to Ben's voice unraveling the horrifying history of the house. Each tape revealed more about the rituals and the terrible price Victor and his followers had paid for their lust for power. The final tape held a clue, a description of a ritual that could undo the binding spell and set the spirits free. It was dangerous and required a personal sacrifice, but it was the only way. Gathering the items I needed, a mirror, candles, and a piece of Ben's belongings, I prepared for the ritual. As I arranged the candles in a circle and placed the mirror in the center, the cellar grew colder, the air thick with anticipation. The shadows on the walls seemed to move with a life of their own, watching my every move. I lit the candles and began to chant the words I had memorized from the tape, my voice trembling with fear and determination. The air crackled with energy, and the whispers grew louder, merging into a cacophony of voices pleading for release. The shadows swirled around me, and I felt a presence pressing against my mind, testing my resolve. "You must be strong," Ben's voice echoed in my head. "You mustn't give in." I focused on the mirror, its surface reflecting the flickering candlelight, and continued the chant. Suddenly, the mirror's surface rippled, and a face appeared, Victor's twisted, malevolent visage. His eyes burned with anger and madness, and his mouth twisted into a snarl. "You cannot undo what has been done," he hissed, his voice a venomous whisper. "You will join them, just like your brother." The shadows closed in, and the temperature plummeted, but I refused to be intimidated. I pressed on, the words of the chant spilling from my lips with renewed fervor. As the ritual reached its climax, the shadows writhed in agony, and Victor's face contorted with rage. The mirror shattered, and a blinding light filled the cellar, driving back the darkness. The voices of the trapped souls rose in a harmonious chorus, their gratitude palpable. The oppressive weight lifted, and the air grew warmer, lighter. I slumped to the floor, exhausted but victorious. The shadows had retreated, and the whispers had ceased. I knew the spirits had been freed, and the curse lifted. I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known since Ben's death. I had done it. I had finished what he had started, and in doing so, I had finally found closure. As I made my way back upstairs, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I turned to see a faint, ethereal figure standing in the hallway. It was Ben. He smiled at me, his eyes filled with pride and relief. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice a gentle breeze. "You've set us free." And with that, he faded into the light, leaving me with a sense of peace and closure I never thought I'd find. The house, now free from its dark past, felt different. The air was lighter, the oppressive weight lifted. I knew it was time to leave, to start anew. As I walked out the door and into the sunlight, I felt a renewed sense of hope. The shadows were gone, and the whispers had been silenced. The secrets of the past had been uncovered, and the spirits had found their peace. And so had I. Hey! Subscribe for more true scary stories. Story 2. Haunted Surfaces. The day I moved into the old Victorian house, I knew something was off. The air felt thick, charged with a history that whispered through the creaking floorboards and the groaning walls. It was the kind of house that loomed over you, casting long, eerie shadows even in broad daylight. I brushed off the unease, attributing it to my overactive imagination and the exhaustion of the move. Little did I know, my life was about to take a turn for the horrifying. I was unpacking boxes in the living room when I first noticed it. The wallpaper, a once charming floral pattern, seemed to shift under my gaze. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light or my tired eyes playing games. But as I stood there, squinting at the wall, the flowers appeared to sway gently, as if caught in a breeze. I shook my head, chuckling nervously at my own ridiculous thoughts, and went back to work. That night, I was awoken by a sound I couldn't quite place. It was a soft, rustling noise, like leaves brushing against a window pane. I sat up in bed, straining to hear more clearly. The room was pitch dark, save for the faint glow of the moon filtering through the curtains. I reached for my phone to check the time, 3:15 a.m. The sound persisted, growing louder and more insistent. My heart pounded in my chest as I got out of bed and followed the noise down the hallway. When I reached the living room, I froze. The wallpaper had changed. It no longer displayed the quaint floral design. Instead, it depicted a chilling scene, a dense forest at night, with shadows that seemed to stretch and shift ominously. I blinked rapidly, trying to clear my vision. This couldn't be real. Wallpaper doesn't just change on its own. I approached the wall cautiously, my fingers trembling as I reached out to touch it. The surface felt the same, but the image remained. The next morning, I called my best friend, Emily. "You won't believe this," I said, my voice shaky with a mix of fear and disbelief. "The wallpaper in my living room, it changed last night. It looked like a forest. Are you sure you're not just tired and seeing things?" Emily's tone was skeptical, but I could hear the concern underlying her words. "I know what I saw," I insisted. "It was real." Okay, she relented. "I'll come over after work and take a look. Maybe there's a logical explanation." That day dragged on interminably. Every creak and groan of the house set my nerves on edge. By the time Emily arrived, I was a bundle of anxiety. We stood in the living room, staring at the wallpaper together. It had reverted to the floral pattern, pristine and unassuming. Emily gave me a sympathetic look. "Maybe it was a dream," she suggested gently. "I know what I saw," I repeated, frustration creeping into my voice. "It wasn't a dream." As if to mock me, the wallpaper began to change again right before our eyes. The flowers morphed into dark, twisted trees, their branches clawing at an unseen sky. Emily gasped, clutching my arm. "Okay, that is not normal." We spent hours researching the history of the house, trying to uncover any clues. The previous owners had moved out suddenly, leaving no forwarding address. There were no records of anything unusual, no ghost stories or tragic events. Yet, the evidence was right in front of us, etched into the very walls of my home. As night fell, the forest scene grew darker, more oppressive. Shadows moved within the trees, taking on vaguely human forms. I could feel their eyes on me, cold and calculating. Sleep was impossible, so I sat in the living room, watching the wallpaper with a mix of dread and morbid curiosity. When the clock struck midnight, I saw it, a face, pale and spectral, staring back at me from the depths of the forest. It mouthed silent words, its eyes filled with sorrow and fear. I bolted upright, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The face vanished, but the terror lingered. I knew, without a doubt, that something was horribly wrong with this house. And whatever it was just getting started. Hey, subscribe for more scary stories. Sleep eluded me for the rest of the night. I spent the early hours pacing the floor, the wallpaper's eerie transformation replaying in my mind. Morning light finally filtered through the curtains, casting long shadows across the living room. The forest scene had vanished, replaced once more by the innocent floral pattern. I felt a hollow relief, knowing deep down that this was only the beginning. I called Emily, my voice trembling as I recounted the events of the night. There was a face, I said, my words stumbling over each other. It was watching me from the wallpaper. I believe you, she said, her tone serious. We need to find out what's causing this. Maybe we should bring in an expert. The idea of involving a paranormal investigator seemed absurd, but what other choice did I have? Emily made the arrangements, and by late afternoon, a man named Dr. Caldwell arrived. He was an older gentleman, with sharp eyes that missed nothing and an air of calm authority. So, you say the wallpaper changes? He asked, setting up equipment in the living room. Yes, I replied, showing him the photos I'd taken with my phone. It turns into a forest at night, and I saw a face in it last night. Dr. Caldwell examined the images, nodding thoughtfully. I've seen similar cases, he said. It could be a residual haunting, an echo of a past event. But the changing wallpaper, that's unusual. We spent hours talking, the afternoon slipping into evening as he asked me about the house, its history, and any other strange occurrences. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, I was exhausted but hopeful that we might find some answers. As night fell, the familiar dread crept back. Dr. Caldwell had set up cameras and motion sensors around the living room, determined to capture whatever was happening. Emily stayed by my side, her presence a small comfort in the growing darkness. Midnight approached, and the room seemed to grow colder. The floral wallpaper began its slow, horrifying transformation into the forest scene. I watched, my heart pounding, as the trees emerged, their branches twisting and writhing like living things. The shadows within the forest grew darker, more defined. And then, the face appeared again. There it is, I whispered, pointing. Dr. Caldwell adjusted his camera, capturing the image. The face was clearer this time, a woman, her eyes wide with fear. Her lips moved, forming silent words that I couldn't understand. Do you see that? Emily whispered, her grip tightening on my arm. I do, Dr. Caldwell said. This is extraordinary. The woman in the wallpaper seemed to notice us. Her eyes locked onto mine, and I felt a chill run down my spine. She mouthed the word help over and over again, her expression desperate. She wants something, I said, my voice barely audible. She wants us to help her. Dr. Caldwell nodded. We need to find out who she is. There must be a reason she's trapped here. We spent the next few days delving into the house's history, combing through old records and archives. We discovered that the house had once belonged to a family named Whitmore. The last resident, a young woman named Clara Whitmore, had disappeared under mysterious circumstances in the late 1800s. Her body was never found, and her disappearance remained unsolved. As we dug deeper, the wallpaper continued its nightly transformations. Each time, Clara's face appeared, growing more distinct and more desperate. It was clear she was trying to communicate with us, but we couldn't decipher her message. The frustration and fear gnawed at me, making sleep impossible. One night, as I sat alone in the living room, the wallpaper shifted once more. Clara's face appeared, and this time, I could hear her voice, faint and echoing, as if from a great distance. "Help me," she whispered. "Find me." I leaned forward, my heart racing. "Clara, how can we help you?" I asked aloud, hoping she could hear me. "Find me," she repeated, her voice growing weaker. "I'm here, under." Her words faded, and the forest scene melted away, replaced by the floral pattern once more. I sat back, shaking with a mixture of fear and determination. We were getting closer, but I had a feeling that the answers we sought would not come easily. Clara's restless spirit was bound to this house, and it was up to us to uncover the truth and set her free. Days blurred together as Emily, Dr. Caldwell, and I searched for clues about Clara Whitmore. The house seemed to mock us with its eerie silence, as if it held secrets too dark to reveal. Each night, the wallpaper transformed, and Clara's face appeared, her silent pleas growing more desperate. The need to uncover the truth gnawed at me, driving me to the brink of obsession. We found an old newspaper article from 1897, detailing Clara's disappearance. It spoke of a young woman with a bright future, engaged to a wealthy businessman. She vanished without a trace one stormy night, and despite extensive searches, no evidence was found. The case went cold, and Clara was eventually presumed dead. "There's something we're missing," Emily said, her voice tinged with frustration. We were sitting in the library, surrounded by yellowed newspapers and dusty old books. "She keeps saying find me. But where?" "I think she might be buried here," Dr. Caldwell suggested. "The fact that she appears in the wallpaper indicates a strong connection to this house. We need to look for any hidden places." We combed through the house, examining every nook and cranny. The basement was damp and musty, filled with old furniture and cobwebs. The attic was cluttered with forgotten possessions and broken toys. But nothing seemed out of the ordinary. One evening, as I sat in the living room, the wallpaper began its nightly transformation. This time, Clara's face was clearer than ever. Her eyes were wide with terror, and her lips moved frantically. I strained to hear her words, my heart pounding. "Under the floor," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I bolted upright. "Under the floor," I repeated, grabbing a flashlight and calling for Emily and Dr. Caldwell. We rushed to the living room, pulling back the rug and examining the floorboards. "There!" Emily exclaimed, pointing to a loose board near the fireplace. We pried it up, revealing a small, hidden compartment. Inside, we found a bundle of old letters and a locket, tarnished with age. Dr. Caldwell carefully opened the letters, his eyes scanning the faded handwriting. "These are love letters," he said. "From Clara to her fiancé. They speak of secret meetings and plans to elope." My heart sank as I realized the implications. "She was planning to run away," I said. But something happened. We continued to dig through the hidden compartment, and beneath the letters, we found a small, leather-bound diary. The pages were brittle and yellowed, but the words were still legible. Clara's voice seemed to leap off the page as we read her final entries. July 14th, 1897. "I fear for my life. Father has discovered our plans, and he is furious. He says he will never allow me to marry beneath my station. I am to be sent away, but I will not go without a fight. If anything happens to me, know that I love you, and I will find a way back to you." We sat in stunned silence, the weight of Clara's words sinking in. "Her father," I whispered. "He must have done something terrible." Dr. Caldwell nodded grimly. "We need to find out more about Clara's father. There must be records of him somewhere." As we delved deeper into the past, we uncovered a darker side to the Whitmore family. Clara's father, Thomas Whitmore, was a ruthless businessman with a reputation for cruelty. He had a temper, and there were rumors of violent outbursts. It became clear that he would stop at nothing to maintain control over his daughter. One night, as the wallpaper transformed once more, Clara's face appeared, more vivid and sorrowful than ever. "The cellar," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Find me in the cellar." We hurried to the basement, our hearts pounding with anticipation and dread. The cellar was dark and cold, the air thick with the scent of damp earth. We searched the walls and floor, looking for any signs of disturbance. Finally, in the far corner, we found a loose stone. With great effort, we pried it free, revealing a small, hollow space. Inside, wrapped in a tattered cloth, were the remains of a young woman. Clara's locket lay atop the bundle, glinting faintly in the dim light. Tears streamed down my face as I realized we had found her. "Clara," I whispered, my voice breaking. "We found you." Dr. Caldwell carefully retrieved the remains, his expression solemn. "We need to give her a proper burial," he said. "And perhaps, finally, she will be at peace." As we prepared to lay Clara to rest, a sense of relief washed over me. But deep down, I knew that the house still held more secrets. And the darkness that had claimed Clara was not yet done with us. The night we buried Clara was calm, almost peaceful. We chose a quiet spot in the garden, under an old oak tree where the morning sun would touch her grave. Emily, Dr. Caldwell, and I stood in silence, each of us lost in our thoughts as we laid her remains to rest. The air felt lighter, the oppressive atmosphere of the house momentarily lifted. We hoped this would bring her spirit peace, but a part of me remained uneasy. That evening, I sat alone in the living room, watching the floral wallpaper. It held steady, its patterns unmoving, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe this was truly the end of our ordeal. Emily and Dr. Caldwell left, promising to check on me in the morning. Sleep came quickly, but it was not the restful sleep I had hoped for. My dreams were filled with images of Clara, her face twisted in fear, her silent pleas echoing in my mind. I woke with a start, the room dark and silent. The clock read 3:15 a.m., the same time I had first heard the rustling sound that led me to this nightmare. I sat up, heart pounding, and reached for the flashlight on my nightstand. The house was unnervingly quiet, the kind of silence that presses down on you, making every creak and groan seem magnified. I knew something was wrong. As I approached the living room, my steps faltered. The wallpaper had changed again, but this time, it was not the forest scene. Instead, it was an image of the room itself, but distorted, like a funhouse mirror. The furniture was twisted and warped, the shadows long and menacing. And there, in the center, stood Clara. She was not the sorrowful figure we had come to know, but something more sinister, her eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. "Help me," her voice echoed, but it was different now, deeper, darker. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized that Clara's spirit was not the only one haunting this house. Something else was here, something far more malevolent. "Clara?" I whispered, stepping closer. "Is that you?" Her image flickered, the light in her eyes intensifying. "Leave this place," she said, her voice layered with another, deeper tone. "You do not belong here." I backed away, fear clawing at my chest. "What do you mean?" "We laid you to rest. We thought you were at peace." "Peace," she laughed, a sound that sent shivers through me. "There is no peace here. He won't let me go." "Who?" I demanded, my voice trembling. "Who won't let you go?" She stepped forward, her face inches from the wallpaper. "My father," she whispered. "His spirit is bound to this house, and he won't rest until he has taken another." The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. Thomas Whitmore's malevolent spirit had trapped Clara, and now, it was coming for me. Panic surged through me as the wallpaper began to ripple and shift, the image of Clara distorting into a monstrous form. I ran to the front door, but it wouldn't budge. The air grew colder, and I could feel his presence, a dark, oppressive force that wrapped around me like a vice. "Leave me alone!" I screamed, banging on the door, desperate to escape. The house groaned in response, the walls closing in as if alive. I turned and ran towards the basement, hoping to find a way out through the cellar. The basement was pitch dark, the smell of damp earth stronger than ever. I fumbled for the light switch, my hands shaking. The bulb flickered to life, casting eerie shadows across the room. The cellar wall where we had found Clara's remains stood ominously, and I could hear a faint whispering, a chorus of voices blending into a haunting melody. "Help me," Clara's voice rose above the others, desperate and pleading. "Free me from him." I grabbed a shovel, driven by a mix of terror and determination. I began to dig frantically, the earth giving way beneath my frantic efforts. The whispering grew louder, filling my head with a cacophony of voices. Suddenly, I hit something solid. I cleared away the dirt, revealing an old wooden box, its surface covered in strange symbols. I pried it open, my breath catching as I saw what lay inside: a set of bones, wrapped in tattered fabric, and a small, rusted key. The moment I touched the key, the whispering stopped, replaced by a deafening silence. I turned to leave, but the cellar door slammed shut. Thomas Whitmore's ghostly figure stood there, his eyes burning with rage. "You cannot leave," he hissed. "You belong to me now." Desperation gave me strength. I held the key up, its cold metal biting into my palm. "No," I said, my voice steady. "I don't belong to you. Clara doesn't belong to you. It's time for you to go." With all my might, I drove the key into the earth, a surge of energy radiating from the point of contact. Thomas screamed, his form dissolving into shadows. The house shuddered, the oppressive atmosphere lifting as his spirit was finally banished. I stumbled out of the basement, the first rays of dawn breaking through the windows. The house felt different, lighter, as if a great weight had been lifted. I knew it was over. Clara was free, and so was I. But as I sat on the porch, catching my breath, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed within me. The house might be at peace, but the darkness I had encountered left a mark, a shadow that would follow me wherever I went. Hey! Subscribe for more true scary stories. Story 3. The Clown. I found the tape while sorting through the dusty attic of my childhood home. The sun filtered through the small, grimy window, casting a dim light over the cluttered space. I had moved back in temporarily to help my mom downsize after Dad's passing. It was a melancholic task, made even more so by the memories that each box unearthed. Then, in an old, cracked cardboard box labeled Jason's Birthday 1995, I discovered the VHS tape. Curious and feeling a wave of nostalgia, I took the tape downstairs to the living room where an old VCR still sat. The thought of watching my 6th birthday party filled me with a strange excitement. I vaguely remembered the day, the cake, the friends, the laughter. But what stuck with me most was the eerie sense of déjà vu that washed over me as I inserted the tape into the player. The screen flickered, and the grainy footage came to life. There I was, a small boy with a toothy grin, surrounded by friends and family. The camera panned to the yard, decorated with balloons and streamers. My younger self blew out the candles on a cake while everyone cheered. Everything seemed normal at first, just a typical birthday party. But then, in the background, I noticed something odd, a clown, blurry and indistinct, always just out of focus. Did we hire a clown for my party? I asked Mom as she walked in carrying a box of photo albums. She frowned, peering at the screen. I don't remember hiring one. Maybe it was one of the neighbors playing dress up. But as I continued to watch, unease crept in. The clown appeared in several scenes, always at the edge of the frame, never clear. It seemed to be watching, its face painted in exaggerated features, but its eyes obscured. Every time I tried to focus on it, my vision blurred. The camera never lingered on the clown, almost as if it was trying to avoid it. "I don't like this," Mom muttered, her face pale. "Turn it off, Jason." But I couldn't. Something about the clown's presence was magnetic, pulling me in. The tape ended with a sudden cut to black, but not before a final shot of the clown waving slowly, its gloved hand moving in a mechanical manner. A chill ran down my spine. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The clown's blurry form haunted my dreams. I woke up drenched in sweat, the image of its waving hand burned into my mind. Determined to find answers, I decided to dig deeper into the old box. Among the scattered photos and party favors, I found an envelope marked "Do Not Open." Inside was a series of photographs from that same birthday party. In each one, the clown was present, its face always turned away or obscured by shadows. There was no mistaking it now. This wasn't just a neighbor playing a prank. The way it lingered, the way it seemed to focus on me, it felt deliberate. "Who are you?" I whispered to the photographs, my hands trembling. The attic was eerily quiet as I stared at the clown, the sense of dread growing with each passing moment. I knew I had to find out the truth, no matter how terrifying it might be. Determined to uncover the truth about the mysterious clown, I decided to search for more information. The next morning, I went through the old family photo albums, looking for any other signs of the clown in my childhood. My fingers trembled as I flipped through the pages, my eyes scanning every picture. But there was nothing unusual. It seemed the clown only appeared on that one particular day. Later, I asked Mom again if she remembered anything odd about my 6th birthday. She shook her head, her brow furrowing. "I don't remember much from that day, Jason. It was a long time ago. Maybe your father knew something, but he's gone now." My father's death had left many questions unanswered. He was always the one with the camera, documenting every family event meticulously. I decided to go through his old journals, hoping to find any mention of the clown. In the basement, I found a locked chest containing his personal items. With some effort, I managed to pry it open. Inside, I found a collection of journals, neatly arranged by year. I grabbed the one labeled 1995 and began reading. The entries were mostly mundane, detailing day-to-day activities and thoughts. But then, in an entry dated a few days after my birthday, I found a chilling note. "There's something strange about that clown," my father had written. "It wasn't hired by us, and none of the neighbors know anything about it. Jason keeps mentioning it in his sleep, says the clown talks to him. I thought it was just a nightmare, but now I'm not so sure." The journal continued with more entries about the clown. My father had tried to investigate, asking around the neighborhood, but no one remembered seeing a clown at the party. It was as if it had appeared out of nowhere. The last entry about the clown was particularly disturbing. "Jason woke up screaming last night. Said the clown was in his room. I checked, but found nothing. Still, I can't shake the feeling we're being watched." A cold shiver ran down my spine. My father's fears mirrored my own. The clown wasn't just a figment of my imagination. But what did it want? Why was it haunting my childhood memories? That night, I had another nightmare. The clown was there, its face clearer than before. It spoke in a low, raspy voice, "Remember me, Jason?" I woke up with a start, my heart pounding. This was no ordinary haunting. The clown was real, and it wanted something from me. Desperate for answers, I reached out to my old childhood friends who had attended the party. Most of them didn't remember much, but one, Sarah, recalled something odd. "I remember being scared of the clown," she said over the phone. "It wasn't like other clowns. It felt wrong. I tried to stay away from it, but it was always watching." Her words confirmed my worst fears. This clown was not just a creepy memory, it had a presence, a malevolent aura that affected those around it. I needed to know more, to remember what had been buried in my mind for so long. I decided to visit the local library and look through old newspapers and town records, hoping to find any mention of unusual events or strange occurrences around that time. At the library, I sifted through archives, my anxiety growing with each passing hour. Finally, I found something that made my blood run cold. An old newspaper article dated a few days after my birthday party reported a series of disappearances in our neighborhood. Children had gone missing, and the only common link was a sighting of a clown near each child's home. I stared at the article, my heart racing. This wasn't just about a creepy figure from my past. It was something far more sinister. The clown had been involved in those disappearances, and it had been at my party. But why was I still here? What did it want from me now? The library was nearly empty as I sat there, staring at the newspaper article. The disappearances, the sightings of the clown, they all pointed to something dark and malicious. I had to dig deeper. I photocopied the article and took it home, my mind racing with questions. Why hadn't my parents told me about the missing children? Why hadn't they remembered the clown? That evening, I spread the article and photos across the dining room table, trying to piece together the puzzle. The phone rang, startling me out of my thoughts. It was Sarah. "Jason, I've been thinking about that clown. I think you should talk to my grandmother. She's always been superstitious and might know something." I agreed, and the next morning, I found myself on Sarah's doorstep. Her grandmother, Mrs. Thompson, was a frail but sharp-minded woman. She greeted me warmly, but her eyes darkened when I mentioned the clown. "Ah, the cursed one," she said, her voice trembling. "I was hoping it was just a legend." "What legend?" I asked, leaning forward, my curiosity piqued. Mrs. Thompson sighed and settled into her chair. "Many years ago, there was a clown who performed at children's parties. He was known for his tricks and illusions. But there was a darkness to him. Children began to disappear after his shows. It was said he made a deal with a malevolent spirit, trading the children's souls for his own immortality." A chill ran down my spine. "Are you saying that clown was at my party?" She nodded slowly. "It sounds like it. The spirit must have been awakened. Did you or your family disturb anything recently?" I thought back to the attic and the old box I had found. We've been going through old stuff. I found the tape of my birthday party, and that's when all this started happening. "That explains it," Mrs. Thompson said. "The spirit latched onto you through the tape. It's trying to reclaim what it lost. You must find a way to break the connection." "How?" I asked, feeling a surge of desperation. She handed me an old book, its cover worn and pages yellowed. "This contains the ritual. It won't be easy, and it will be dangerous. But it's your only hope." Armed with the book, I returned home, determined to end the nightmare. I spent the next few days preparing, gathering the necessary items for the ritual. My mom watched me with concern but didn't question my actions. She could sense the urgency and fear in my eyes. The night of the ritual, I set everything up in the living room, the eerie glow of candles casting long shadows on the walls. I placed the tape in the center and began chanting the incantations from the book. The air grew cold, and the shadows seemed to come alive, swirling around me. Suddenly, the TV turned on, the screen flickering to life. The clown appeared, clearer than ever, its eyes glowing with malevolence. "You can't stop me, Jason," it hissed, its voice echoing through the room. I continued chanting, my voice trembling but determined. The room shook, and the clown's image wavered. It screamed in rage, its form distorting. Just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, the clown lunged at me, its face twisted with fury. But before it could reach me, the tape burst into flames, the clown's scream turning into a wail of despair. The shadows receded, and the coldness lifted. The room fell silent, save for the crackling of the burning tape. I collapsed to the floor, exhausted but relieved. It was over. The clown was gone. Or so I thought. As I lay there, catching my breath, I heard a faint, familiar voice. "Remember me, Jason?" It was the clown, its voice echoing from somewhere deep within the house. The voice echoed through the house, sending a chill down my spine. I jumped to my feet, scanning the room for any sign of the clown. The burned tape lay in ashes, but the sinister presence remained. My heart pounded as I realized the ritual hadn't been enough. The clown's spirit still lingered, and it was angrier than ever. Desperation and fear clawed at me, but I couldn't give up now. I grabbed the book Mrs. Thompson had given me, flipping through the pages for any additional clues. There, near the end, was a passage about confronting malevolent spirits directly. It was risky, but I had no other choice. I gathered my courage and followed the instructions, creating a protective circle with salt and lighting the candles once more. As I stood in the center of the circle, I called out to the clown, my voice steady despite the terror gnawing at my insides. "Show yourself." Face me and end this." The temperature in the room plummeted, and the shadows seemed to writhe in response. Slowly, the clown materialized before me, its grotesque smile more menacing than ever. "You think you can defeat me?" it sneered, its eyes glowing with malice. "I have to," I replied, trying to keep my voice from shaking. "Why are you haunting me? What do you want?" The clown's smile widened, revealing sharp, yellowed teeth. "Your soul, Jason. Just like the others. You escaped me once, but you won't again." Anger surged through me. "I'm not afraid of you," I shouted, the words echoing in the dark room. "You have no power over me." The clown laughed, a chilling sound that reverberated through the walls. "Brave words for a scared little boy. Let's see if you can back them up." With that, the clown lunged at me, but it couldn't penetrate the protective circle. It snarled in frustration, clawing at the invisible barrier. I began the final incantation, my voice growing stronger with each word. The air around us crackled with energy, and the room shook violently. The clown's form began to waver, its sinister grin faltering. "No! You can't do this," it screamed, but I didn't stop. I poured all my fear, anger, and determination into the chant, determined to end this nightmare once and for all. The clown's image flickered and distorted, its screams turning into a high-pitched wail. The shadows in the room swirled around it, converging on its form and pulling it apart piece by piece. With one final, ear-piercing shriek, the clown disintegrated, leaving only a thin, wispy shadow that quickly faded into nothingness. The room fell silent. The oppressive cold lifted, and the candles flickered out. I collapsed to the floor, exhausted but relieved. The nightmare was finally over. The clown was gone. Or so I thought. Weeks passed, and life slowly returned to normal. The house felt lighter, the air warmer. Mom and I finished sorting through the attic, and I found a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. But every now and then, in the quiet of the night, I could swear I heard a faint, familiar voice whispering my name. One evening, as I was settling into bed, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from an unknown number. I hesitated, a sense of dread washing over me, but curiosity got the better of me. I opened the message, and my blood ran cold. "Did you miss me, Jason?" Attached was a photo of my 6th birthday party, the clown standing just out of focus, its sinister grin aimed directly at the camera. I dropped the phone, my heart pounding. The clown was back. And this time, it wouldn't stop until it had what it wanted. Story 4. The Whispering Echo. It had been 3 years since the tragic accident that claimed my wife, Emily. The memory of that night still haunted me, the screeching tires, the deafening crash, and the silence that followed. Life had become a monotonous blur of work and sleepless nights. I had convinced myself that time would heal the wound, but the gaping void Emily left behind only seemed to grow larger with each passing day. One late October evening, as the wind howled outside my small, dimly lit apartment, I found myself sitting alone on the couch. The flickering shadows cast by the TV added an eerie ambience to the already oppressive silence. My phone rang, its sudden intrusion causing me to jump. Glancing at the screen, I saw an unknown number. Hesitant but curious, I answered. "Hello?" I said, my voice wavering slightly. "Hi, honey." "It's me," came the reply, clear and familiar. My heart stopped. It was Emily's voice. The same soft, comforting tone that used to lull me to sleep. But it couldn't be her. She was gone. "Who is this?" I demanded, my grip tightening on the phone. "This isn't funny." "It's me, love. Emily." "I miss you," the voice continued, now tinged with sadness. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I was hearing. It had to be a cruel prank, but how could someone mimic her voice so perfectly? "Emily's dead," I whispered, more to myself than to the caller. "Whoever you are, stop this now." "I know it's hard to believe," the voice persisted, "but it's really me. I need your help, Peter. Please, come to the house." Our old house had been left abandoned since the accident. I couldn't bring myself to sell it, nor could I face the memories trapped within its walls. The thought of returning there now, spurred by this disturbing call, filled me with a sense of dread. Yet, a part of me clung to the hope that this might somehow be real. Against my better judgment, I decided to go. I grabbed my coat and keys, the phone call still echoing in my mind. As I drove through the dark, winding streets, the memories of our life together flooded back. Emily's laughter, our plans for the future, the life we were supposed to have. Each memory cut deeper, fueling my determination to find out the truth. The house stood ominously at the end of the street, its silhouette barely visible against the moonlit sky. I parked the car and sat there for a moment, staring at the front door. My heart pounded in my chest, a mix of fear and anticipation. I took a deep breath, got out of the car, and walked up the path. As I stepped inside, the air felt colder than it should have. The familiar creak of the floorboards under my feet brought a rush of nostalgia and sorrow. The house was just as we had left it, frozen in time. I called out her name, my voice echoing through the empty rooms. "Emily? Are you here?" I waited, but there was no response. Just as I was about to give up and leave, the phone rang again. This time, the sound seemed to come from upstairs. I hesitated, then followed the noise, each step growing heavier with trepidation. Reaching our bedroom, I saw the phone lying on the bed, its screen lit up with the same unknown number. I picked it up and answered, my hand trembling. "Peter, you made it," the voice said, and this time it was accompanied by a faint sob. "Thank you. I need you to find something for me. It's in the attic. Hey, subscribe for more scary stories." My pulse quickened as I stood at the base of the attic stairs, the wooden ladder creaking under my weight as I pulled it down. The attic had always been a place of mystery, even when Emily was alive. We rarely ventured up there, only to store old memories in dusty boxes. Now, it seemed the darkness held secrets far more sinister. I climbed the ladder, each rung feeling colder than the last. The musty air of the attic greeted me, filled with the scent of forgotten times. My flashlight cut through the gloom, revealing cobwebs and stacks of boxes. I swept the light across the space, searching for anything that might stand out. "Emily?" I called softly, my voice barely more than a whisper. The only response was the creak of the house settling. I pushed forward, my eyes scanning for any clue. Suddenly, my beam fell upon a small, ornate box tucked away in a corner, almost hidden beneath an old quilt. I knelt down and reached for the box, my fingers trembling. It was surprisingly heavy, and as I opened it, I was greeted by a collection of photographs and letters. Among them was a leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age. I opened the journal, recognizing Emily's handwriting instantly. "Dear Peter," the first entry began. "If you are reading this, then something unimaginable has happened. There are things I never told you, things I never wanted you to know." My heart sank as I continued reading. Emily had written about her family history, a legacy intertwined with the supernatural. She described a curse, a dark force that had plagued her ancestors for generations. "I thought I could escape it," she wrote. "But now I fear it has found me. And I fear it will find you too, Peter." My hand shook as I read the final entry, dated just days before her death. "If I am gone, you must protect yourself. Find the locket. It holds the key." The locket. I had seen it before, a delicate silver piece she always wore around her neck. But where was it now? The memory of the accident surged back, the twisted wreckage, her lifeless body. I had never thought to look for it among her belongings. Determined to uncover the truth, I searched the attic more thoroughly, but the locket was nowhere to be found. Defeated, I descended the ladder, the journal clutched tightly in my hand. The house felt even colder now, as if it had absorbed the fear and sorrow from Emily's words. I returned to the bedroom, the phone still lying on the bed. I picked it up, my mind racing with questions. "I found the journal," I said, hoping the voice would respond. "But the locket is missing." "You need to find it, Peter," the voice replied, more urgent than before. Without it, I cannot protect you. Look in the basement. There are things you need to see. The basement was the one place I had avoided since her death. The shadows seemed deeper there, the darkness more suffocating. But I had come this far, and there was no turning back now. I made my way downstairs, the creaking of the steps echoing through the silent house. As I reached the basement door, I hesitated. The air grew colder, the sense of foreboding stronger. I steeled myself and opened the door, the stairs descending into pitch blackness. My flashlight flickered, and for a moment, I thought it would go out completely. But it held steady, and I took a deep breath before stepping into the abyss. The basement was a maze of old furniture and storage boxes, the air thick with dust. My flashlight caught glimpses of objects long forgotten, but nothing that seemed out of place. Then, in the far corner, I saw it. A small, wooden chest, partially covered by a tattered blanket. I approached the chest, my heartbeat echoing in my ears. As I lifted the blanket, a chill ran down my spine. The chest was locked, but I noticed a keyhole that matched the intricate design of the locket. This had to be it. I just needed to find the locket, and maybe, just maybe, I could unlock the secrets that had haunted Emily, and now, me. I searched every nook and cranny of the basement, but the locket remained elusive. Frustrated and exhausted, I sat down on an old wooden stool, trying to gather my thoughts. The basement was suffocatingly silent, except for the faint sound of the wind howling outside. I knew I had to think of somewhere else the locket might be. Somewhere Emily might have hidden it for safekeeping. My thoughts drifted back to our happier times together. Emily always had a knack for hiding things in plain sight, disguising them as everyday objects. With renewed determination, I made my way back upstairs, mentally revisiting every corner of the house. Then it struck me, the old grandfather clock in the living room. Emily loved that clock, often joking that it held the secrets of time itself. I approached the clock, its pendulum swinging methodically. Opening the small door at the base, I rummaged through the dust-covered gears and weights. My heart leaped as my fingers brushed against something cold and metallic. Pulling it out, I found the locket, its silver surface tarnished but intact. I held it up, the intricate design glinting faintly in the dim light. With the locket in hand, I returned to the basement, feeling both apprehensive and hopeful. The chest awaited me, its lock an enigma I was now equipped to solve. I inserted the locket's tiny key into the keyhole and turned it with a click. The lid creaked open, revealing its contents, a collection of letters, old photographs, and a small, ornate dagger. I carefully picked up one of the letters, its paper fragile with age. It was addressed to Emily from her grandmother, detailing the history of the curse that plagued their family. Each generation, it seemed, had faced a malevolent spirit that sought to claim their lives. The dagger, I read, was a protective talisman meant to ward off the spirit if used correctly. The phone rang again, startling me. I grabbed it, half expecting Emily's voice. But this time, the voice was different, darker, more sinister. "You think you can stop me with that?" it hissed. "You have no idea what you're dealing with." "Who are you?" I demanded, fear creeping into my voice. "What do you want?" "I am the curse," the voice replied, a chilling laugh echoing through the line. "And now, I want you." The line went dead, leaving me in a silence more oppressive than before. My mind raced. I needed to understand the full extent of what I was up against. I returned to the letters, reading through them with a desperate urgency. Each one painted a more vivid picture of the horrors faced by Emily's ancestors. One letter caught my eye, written by Emily herself shortly before her death. "Peter," it began, "if you are reading this, it means the curse has claimed me. I'm so sorry I couldn't protect you. The spirit feeds on fear and despair. The locket and the dagger together can weaken it, but only if used by someone it cannot scare. You must find the strength within you. Remember, love is stronger than fear." Her words filled me with a new sense of resolve. I knew what I had to do. Armed with the locket and the dagger, I needed to confront the spirit. It thrived on my fear, and I had to face it without letting terror consume me. I ascended the basement stairs, the house feeling more oppressive with each step. The air grew colder, and I felt a malevolent presence closing in. I made my way to the living room, the dagger clenched in one hand, the locket in the other. The shadows seemed to move, the darkness deepening around me. "Show yourself," I shouted, my voice trembling slightly but growing stronger. "I'm not afraid of you." The room seemed to shudder, and a figure began to materialize before me. It was a spectral form, twisted and grotesque, its eyes burning with a malevolent fire. The temperature plummeted, and I felt the weight of its presence pressing down on me. "You should be," it snarled, advancing towards me. But I stood my ground, clutching the dagger tightly. Emily's words echoed in my mind, "Love is stronger than fear." With a steady hand, I held up the locket and the dagger, focusing on the love I had for Emily and the strength she believed I had. The spirit hesitated, its form flickering as if destabilized. This was my moment. I lunged forward, the dagger aimed at the heart of the apparition. It let out a deafening screech as the blade made contact, its form dissipating into a swirl of shadows. The room fell silent, the oppressive weight lifting instantly. But just as I began to feel a sense of victory, the phone rang again. The phone's ring pierced the silence, sending a shiver down my spine. I hesitated before answering, half expecting the voice of the malevolent spirit to taunt me once more. Instead, it was Emily's voice, softer now, almost relieved. "Peter, you did it," she said. "But it's not over. There's one more thing you need to do. Meet me at the cemetery. There's something you need to see." The cemetery. The place where Emily was buried. I felt a chill settle in my bones. I didn't want to go, but I knew I had to. With the locket and dagger still in hand, I grabbed my coat and headed out into the night. The wind had picked up, howling through the trees, adding an eerie soundtrack to my journey. The cemetery gates loomed ahead, their iron bars twisted and ancient. I pushed them open with a creak, the sound echoing through the silent graves. As I walked among the headstones, the moon cast long shadows, making the place feel even more otherworldly. I approached Emily's grave, my heart heavy with a mix of hope and dread. Standing by her headstone was a figure, faint and glowing with a pale light. It was Emily, or at least a spectral version of her. She looked just as she did in life, her eyes filled with sorrow and longing. "Emily," I whispered, tears welling up in my eyes. "Is it really you?" "Yes, Peter," she replied, her voice barely more than a whisper. "I've been trapped, unable to move on. The spirit that haunted our family kept me here. But now, you have the power to set me free." "How?" I asked, desperate to help her. "The locket and the dagger," she explained. "Together, they can sever the ties that bind me to this world. You need to place the locket on my grave and use the dagger to complete the ritual. It will break the curse for good." My hands trembled as I placed the locket on her headstone. Emily's form flickered, a look of gratitude in her eyes. I held the dagger, the weight of it feeling heavier than ever. "Will this hurt you?" I asked, fear gripping me. "No," she assured me. "It will finally bring me peace. And you too, Peter. You can live your life free of this darkness." Taking a deep breath, I followed her instructions. The ritual was simple, yet each step felt monumental. As I completed the final part, a gust of wind swept through the cemetery, extinguishing the spectral glow around Emily. Her form began to dissolve, a serene smile on her face. "Thank you, Peter," she said, her voice fading. "I'll always love you." "I love you too," I whispered, my heart breaking as she disappeared completely. The air grew still, a profound silence settling over the cemetery. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of peace. But just as I turned to leave, the ground beneath me trembled. A cold, malevolent laughter echoed through the cemetery, chilling me to the core. The spirit hadn't been vanquished. It had only been weakened. "You think you can get rid of me that easily?" The voice taunted. "I am eternal. And now, I have you. The ground split open, and a dark, shadowy figure emerged, more terrifying than before. I clutched the dagger, but its power seemed diminished. The spirit advanced, its eyes glowing with malice. My heart pounded in my chest, every instinct screaming at me to run, but there was nowhere to go. Just as the spirit lunged at me, a blinding light filled the cemetery. Emily's form reappeared, brighter and more powerful. She stood between me and the spirit, her presence radiating strength and love. "Leave him alone," she commanded, her voice unwavering. The spirit recoiled, its form flickering. "You can't protect him forever," it hissed. "I don't need to," she replied. "Peter is stronger than you know. Our love is stronger than your hatred." With a final, desperate scream, the spirit dissolved into the night, its power broken. The light around Emily faded, and she turned to me one last time. "Live your life, Peter. Be happy." And then she was gone, leaving me alone in the quiet cemetery. I stood there, the weight of the past lifting from my shoulders. Emily's love had saved me, and I knew I had to honor her by living the life she wanted for me. As I walked away, the first light of dawn began to break over the horizon, a new beginning after the long, dark night. The voice on the other end of the phone had sounded exactly like my wife, and it had led me to the truth. Emily was gone, but her love and strength would always be with me. The curse was broken, and I was finally free. Story 5. The Lullaby of the Attic. The first time I heard it, I was drifting on the edge of sleep. The soft, melodic notes of a lullaby floated down from the attic, barely audible but impossible to ignore. I sat up in bed, straining to catch the tune, but it faded into the silence of the night. It was almost as if it had never been there at all. The house, a Victorian relic inherited from my grandparents, had always had its quirks, but this was different. I told myself it was just my imagination, a trick of the wind perhaps, and turned over to sleep. The following night, however, the lullaby returned. This time, it was clearer, each note distinct and haunting. I lay in bed, my heart pounding, as the melody played on. It was beautiful yet unnerving, like a sweet whisper with a dark undertone. The days passed in a blur, each night punctuated by the eerie lullaby. I tried to ignore it, convincing myself it was nothing, but curiosity gnawed at me. One evening, after another sleepless night, I decided to confront the source. Clad in my robe, I climbed the narrow staircase to the attic, each step creaking under my weight. The air grew colder with each step, and the melody grew louder. As I reached the attic door, the music stopped abruptly. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the doorknob. Steeling myself, I opened the door slowly, half expecting to see someone there. The attic was empty, filled only with dusty old furniture and cobwebs. In the center of the room sat an old music box, ornate and worn with age. It was open, but silent. I approached the music box cautiously, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. It was intricately carved, depicting scenes of children playing and angels watching over them. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I reached out to close the lid, but as I touched it, the lid slammed shut on its own, and the room plunged into silence. My breath caught in my throat. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over an old trunk. The attic felt oppressive, the darkness almost tangible. I hurried back down the stairs, my heart racing. I didn't sleep at all that night, the silence more unnerving than the lullaby. The next day, I tried to rationalize what I had seen. Old houses made noises, maybe the music box had a faulty mechanism. But deep down, I knew there was more to it. The lullaby returned that night, louder and more insistent. It was as if it was calling to me, demanding my attention. Determined to find answers, I began researching the history of the house. I discovered that it had been built in the late 1800s by a wealthy family, the Bentleys. They had a young daughter, Laura, who loved to play her music box. She had died tragically at a young age, and the family left the house soon after. The music box had remained, a relic of a happier time. The pieces began to fall into place. The lullaby was Laura's, a fragment of her lingering spirit. The thought both saddened and terrified me. What did she want? Why was she reaching out to me? That night, I made a decision. I would confront Laura and find out what she needed to rest in peace. Armed with what little courage I had, I prepared for the night. I laid out candles, hoping their soft glow would provide some comfort against the oppressive darkness. I waited for the lullaby, my heart thumping in anticipation. When the first notes floated down from the attic, I forced myself to move. The stairs felt longer this time, each step echoing ominously. I reached the attic door and hesitated, gathering my resolve. The music was clearer now, almost inviting. I pushed the door open, and the lullaby stopped mid-note. The silence was deafening. "Laura?" I called out softly, feeling foolish. "Laura Bentley?" For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the music box lid creaked open, and the melody resumed, more melancholic than before. I approached the music box, my heart pounding. "Laura, if you're here, please, I just want to help." A cold breeze swept through the attic, ruffling my hair. I shivered, wrapping my arms around myself. The shadows seemed to dance in the candlelight, creating eerie patterns on the walls. As I reached out to the music box, a soft, childlike voice echoed in the room. "Help me." I froze, my hand inches from the music box. "What do you need, Laura?" I whispered, my voice trembling. "Find the truth," the voice replied, barely audible over the lullaby. The temperature dropped further, and I could see my breath misting in the air. Determined to help, I began searching the attic. I sifted through old trunks, uncovering toys, clothes, and family heirlooms. Finally, in a dusty corner, I found a small, ornate box. Inside was a faded photograph of a young girl, her eyes sad and haunting. It was Laura. As I held the photo, the voice returned. "He took me." "Who took you, Laura?" I asked, my heart aching for the lost child. "The dark man," she replied, her voice trembling with fear. I felt a chill run down my spine. "Who is he, Laura? Where can I find him?" There was no answer. The music box lid slammed shut, and the lullaby stopped. The attic fell silent, the darkness pressing in on me. I hurried downstairs, clutching the photograph. Laura's story was becoming clearer, but I needed more answers. The next day, I visited the local library, searching for any records on the Bentleys. I found an old newspaper article about Laura's disappearance. It mentioned a man named Charles Worthington, a close friend of the family who had vanished shortly after Laura. He was suspected of foul play but was never found. My heart raced as I read the article. Charles Worthington was the dark man. I had to find out what happened to him and Laura. That night, as the lullaby began once more, I steeled myself for another visit to the attic. I had to confront Laura and learn the truth. The attic felt colder than ever as I ascended the stairs, the eerie lullaby guiding my steps. This time, I carried the photograph of Laura with me, hoping it would help her communicate more clearly. When I opened the door, the music box was already playing, its melody mournful and haunting. "Laura, I found your photograph," I said softly, holding it up. "I know about Charles Worthington. Can you tell me more about him?" The air grew thick with tension, and the candle flames flickered wildly. The voice returned, barely a whisper. "He was cruel." "Did he hurt you?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Yes," came the chilling reply. "He trapped me." My blood ran cold. "Where did he trap you, Laura? How can I help you?" The shadows in the attic seemed to deepen, and the temperature dropped further. "Below the house," she whispered. "Find the door." A sense of urgency gripped me. I thanked Laura and hurried downstairs, her words echoing in my mind. Below the house. I had never noticed a basement door, but then again, I had never looked. I searched every corner of the ground floor, finally discovering a small, hidden door behind an old bookshelf in the study. It was locked, but I found an old, rusty key in a nearby drawer. With a deep breath, I unlocked the door and descended into the darkness. The air was damp and musty, and the stairs creaked under my weight. At the bottom, I found a small, dimly lit room. In the center was a large, wooden chest. My hands trembled as I opened it, revealing a collection of children's toys, old clothes, and a diary. I picked up the diary, its leather cover cracked and worn. It was Laura's. As I read through the pages, my heart ached for the little girl who had suffered so much. Charles Worthington had been obsessed with Laura, convinced she was the key to some dark ritual. He had taken her to this basement, intending to use her for his twisted purposes. Suddenly, I heard a creak behind me. I spun around, my heart pounding. The shadows in the corner of the room seemed to coalesce, forming a dark, menacing figure. It was Charles Worthington, his eyes burning with malevolence. "You should not have come here," he hissed, his voice like nails on a chalkboard. I backed away, clutching the diary to my chest. "I know what you did to Laura," I said, my voice shaking. "I'm going to set her free." He laughed, a cold, hollow sound that sent shivers down my spine. "You think you can stop me? She is mine." With a surge of adrenaline, I turned and ran up the stairs, slamming the door behind me. I knew I had to destroy the music box. It was the key to freeing Laura's spirit. As I reached the attic, I grabbed the music box and hurled it to the floor. It shattered, the melody cutting off abruptly. The air in the attic grew still, and for a moment, I thought it was over. But then, a cold, oppressive presence filled the room. The dark figure of Charles Worthington loomed before me, his eyes glowing with rage. "You cannot escape," he snarled, advancing toward me. I stumbled back, my mind racing. Laura's voice echoed in my head. "Find the door." There was another door, one I hadn't found yet. Desperation drove me as I searched the attic, finally discovering a small, hidden panel in the wall. I pushed it open and climbed through, finding myself in a narrow, stone passageway. The stone passageway was damp and cold, the air thick with the scent of earth and decay. My footsteps echoed ominously as I moved forward, the narrow walls pressing in on me. Behind me, I could hear the angry growls of Charles Worthington, his presence like a dark cloud chasing me down the corridor. The passage seemed endless, twisting and turning in unexpected ways, but I pressed on, driven by the need to free Laura's spirit. Finally, I emerged into a small, circular chamber lit by the eerie glow of a single candle. In the center stood an altar, covered in dark stains and strange symbols. This was the heart of Charles's dark ritual, the place where he had trapped Laura's spirit. As I approached the altar, the temperature dropped further, and I could see my breath in the cold air. "Laura," I whispered, holding the photograph close. "I'm here. Show me what to do." The air stirred, and Laura's voice, faint but determined, filled the chamber. "Destroy the altar." I looked around for something to use, spotting a heavy, iron candlestick on a nearby shelf. Gripping it tightly, I raised it above my head and brought it crashing down on the altar. The stone cracked, and a burst of cold air swept through the chamber. I struck again and again, the sound of the altar breaking mingling with Charles's enraged screams. "You will not win," he bellowed, his shadowy form appearing at the entrance to the chamber. "She is mine." Ignoring his threats, I continued to smash the altar until it was nothing but rubble. As the final piece broke, a blinding light filled the chamber, and Charles's form disintegrated into nothingness. The oppressive darkness lifted, replaced by a sense of peace and light. "Thank you," Laura's voice whispered, filled with gratitude. "I'm free." Tears filled my eyes as the light faded, leaving me alone in the chamber. The music box, the photographs, the diary, everything connected to Laura and Charles was gone, vanished with the darkness. I knew that Laura's spirit had finally found rest. Exhausted and relieved, I made my way back through the passageway and up to the attic. The house felt different, lighter, as if a great weight had been lifted. I took one last look around the attic, now just an ordinary, dusty room, and smiled. Laura was free, and the nightmare was over. As I descended the stairs, I felt a sense of closure. I had done what I could to help Laura, and in doing so, I had found a strength within myself I never knew existed. The house was no longer haunted, and the eerie lullaby would never play again. Just as I was about to leave the house, I heard a faint, familiar melody. My heart skipped a beat as I turned, but there was no music box, no haunting figure. The sound was coming from my own mind, a lingering echo of the past. I took a deep breath and stepped outside, feeling the warm sunlight on my face. Laura was gone, but her story would stay with me forever, a reminder of the darkness that lurks in the shadows and the light that can overcome it. Story 6. Whispering Shadows. They told me the voices would go away if I took my medication. Dr. Sullivan, with his reassuring smile, promised me peace and quiet, a normal life free of the intrusive whispers that had haunted me since childhood. But what they never mentioned was that even if the voices ceased, the shadowy figures would remain. I discovered this the hard way, and it all began the night I moved into the old Victorian house on the outskirts of town. The house had been a bargain, almost suspiciously so, but I was desperate for a fresh start. The previous owner, an elderly woman named Mrs. Delaney, had passed away under mysterious circumstances. Whispers of her demise filled the local gossip mills, but I paid them no mind. I needed a place to call home, somewhere to rebuild my life after the last disastrous episode that had landed me in the psychiatric ward. As I unpacked, I felt a chill settle in the room. The temperature seemed to drop several degrees, and I shivered involuntarily. Probably just an old house draft, I muttered to myself, trying to shake off the unease. But as the night deepened, I began to notice them. At first, it was just fleeting glimpses from the corner of my eye, dark, humanoid shapes that seemed to shift and dissolve whenever I tried to focus on them. One evening, I was reading in the study when I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Slowly, I turned my head towards the corner of the room. There it was, a tall, shadowy figure, indistinct yet menacing. It seemed to be watching me, though it had no eyes. I blinked, and it vanished. My heart pounded in my chest. It's just my imagination, I told myself, repeating the mantra Dr. Sullivan had taught me. But deep down, I knew it was real. I started keeping the lights on at all times, but it didn't help. The figures thrived in the shadows, lurking just beyond the reach of the light. They whispered to each other in a language I couldn't understand, their voices low and sibilant. At night, they gathered around my bed, their dark forms undulating and writhing. Sleep became a distant memory, replaced by a perpetual state of hyper-awareness and dread. Desperate, I called Dr. Sullivan. "You said the voices would go away," I pleaded. But no one mentioned the shadows. He paused, his silence heavy with something unspoken. "Are you still taking your medication, Claire?" he asked, evading my question. "Yes, every day," I replied, my voice trembling. "But it's not helping." Days turned into weeks, and my condition deteriorated. The shadows grew bolder, more defined. They no longer vanished when I looked directly at them. Instead, they seemed to revel in my fear, growing darker and more tangible with each passing day. I began to notice changes in the house as well. Strange symbols appeared on the walls, etched in a substance that looked disturbingly like dried blood. The air grew thick with the stench of decay, and I often heard faint, disembodied laughter echoing through the hallways. One night, as I lay in bed, I felt a cold hand touch my face. I screamed and bolted upright, my heart racing. The room was empty, but the sensation of icy fingers lingered on my skin. "What do you want?" I shouted into the darkness, my voice cracking. The shadows merely whispered, their voices merging into a single, malevolent hiss. "We are always here," they said. "You belong to us." I knew then that I was no longer alone in my own home. The shadows had claimed me, and there was no escape. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I was trapped in a nightmare from which there was no waking. The house, with its creaking floors and whispering walls, had become a prison, and the shadows my eternal jailers. Hey, subscribe for more scary stories. Sleep eluded me entirely. The shadows' whispers grew louder, their voices entwining with my thoughts, warping them until I could no longer tell what was real. Days bled into nights, and my world became a blur of fear and fatigue. Dr. Sullivan's attempts to reassure me over the phone seemed futile, his voice a distant echo in the cacophony of my unraveling mind. "You need rest, Claire," he'd say, but rest was a luxury I couldn't afford. One particularly cold night, I decided to investigate the source of the whispers. I grabbed a flashlight and ventured into the basement, where the air was thick with dampness and the smell of mold. As I descended the creaky wooden stairs, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. The beam of my flashlight danced erratically over the walls, casting long, eerie shadows. I could feel their eyes on me, or at least what passed for eyes among these spectral entities. In the corner of the basement, I discovered an old trunk. It was covered in dust, its brass fittings tarnished and dull. The whispers intensified as I approached it, and I hesitated, my heart pounding in my chest. Summoning every ounce of courage, I pried it open. Inside, I found a collection of old photographs and a leather-bound journal. The photographs were of Mrs. Delaney and a group of people I didn't recognize. They all looked solemn, almost fearful. I opened the journal, and my eyes were immediately drawn to a passage written in a frantic, scrawling hand. March 3rd, 1956. The shadows are restless. They whisper of things long forgotten, secrets buried beneath this house. I fear they are angry, seeking retribution for something I cannot comprehend. They speak of a ritual, a binding that went wrong. I am their prisoner, and soon, they will come for me. God help whoever lives here next. A chill ran down my spine. Mrs. Delaney had known about the shadows, had been tormented by them just as I was. But what was this ritual she mentioned? And why had the shadows chosen to haunt this house? My thoughts were interrupted by a sudden crash. I spun around, my flashlight revealing nothing but empty space. The shadows were toying with me, trying to drive me to the brink of insanity. I took the journal upstairs, determined to unravel the mystery. For days, I pored over its pages, piecing together Mrs. Delaney's story. She had been part of a secret society, dabbling in the occult. They had performed a ritual in the house, attempting to summon a spirit for protection. But something had gone terribly wrong. Instead of one spirit, they had unleashed a multitude of malevolent entities. The ritual had failed, and the shadows had been bound to the house ever since, feeding off the fear of its inhabitants. As I read, the whispers grew more agitated. They knew I was uncovering their secret, and they didn't like it. One night, as I sat in the study with the journal, the shadows coalesced into a single figure. It stood before me, more solid than ever before, its form shifting and undulating like a living nightmare. "You should not have come here," it hissed. "You cannot escape us." Terror gripped me, but I forced myself to remain calm. "What do you want?" I demanded, my voice trembling. The shadow laughed, a hollow, mocking sound. "We want what was promised to us. We want your soul." Panic surged through me, and I stumbled back, my mind racing. I had to find a way to break the ritual, to free myself from the shadow's grasp. But how? The journal held the key, I was certain. In one of the last entries, Mrs. Delaney had mentioned a counter-ritual, a way to banish the shadows for good. But the details were vague, and I wasn't sure if I could pull it off. Desperation gnawed at me. I had no choice but to try. My sanity and my life depended on it. As I prepared for the counter-ritual, gathering the necessary items and drawing the symbols from the journal, I felt the shadows closing in, their whispers a constant reminder of the stakes. The air grew thick with anticipation, and I knew that if I failed, I would be lost forever. The night of the counter-ritual arrived, and I could feel the weight of impending doom pressing down on me. Every creak of the old house sounded like a death knell. I laid out the items described in Mrs. Delaney's journal: candles, chalk, a silver dagger, and a small vial of what she had cryptically labeled cleansing salt. The air was thick with tension as I began to draw the symbols on the floor, each stroke a prayer for salvation. The shadows were restless, their whispers rising to a fever pitch. They gathered in the corners of the room, watching, waiting. I could feel their malevolent presence, like a cold hand gripping my heart. I lit the candles, their flickering flames casting eerie shadows on the walls. Taking a deep breath, I began to chant the incantation from the journal, my voice trembling but determined. The shadows seemed to recoil at the words, their forms flickering and writhing in agitation. I continued, my voice growing stronger as the ritual progressed. By the light of these candles, by the purity of this salt, I banish you, I intoned, repeating the phrases over and over. The shadows hissed, their whispers turning into anguished wails. They began to swirl around me, a maelstrom of darkness and rage. As I neared the final part of the incantation, I felt a sharp pain in my side. I looked down to see a shadowy tendril piercing my skin, drawing blood. Gritting my teeth against the pain, I grabbed the silver dagger and plunged it into the tendril. The shadow shrieked and recoiled, the wound sealing as if it had never been. "You will not take me," I shouted, my voice echoing through the house. The final words of the incantation rang out with a power that surprised even me. "Begone, spirits of darkness. Return to the void from whence you came." The shadows screamed in unison, their forms dissolving into nothingness. The air around me seemed to vibrate with a palpable force, and then, as suddenly as it had begun, the room fell silent. The shadows were gone. I collapsed to the floor, exhausted and bleeding. The house was eerily quiet, the oppressive atmosphere lifted. For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. I had done it. I had banished the shadows. As I lay there, catching my breath, I heard a faint sound, a soft, rhythmic thumping. My heart sank as I realized it was coming from the basement. With a sense of dread, I forced myself to my feet and made my way down the stairs. The basement was as dark and foreboding as ever, the air thick with a musty stench. The thumping grew louder, more insistent. I followed the sound to the corner where I had found the trunk. It was closed, but the lid was trembling, as if something inside was trying to get out. I hesitated, fear gnawing at my resolve. But I had come too far to back down now. I reached out with a trembling hand and opened the trunk. Inside was a small, wooden box, its surface covered in strange, arcane symbols. The thumping was coming from within. I lifted the box out and set it on the floor, my hands shaking. Taking a deep breath, I opened the box. Inside was a heart, blackened and still beating. A surge of revulsion and terror washed over me. The heart was surrounded by more symbols, etched into the wood with a precision that spoke of dark magic. I knew instinctively that this was the source of the shadows, the heart of their power. Without thinking, I grabbed the silver dagger and drove it into the heart. It shrieked, a sound so piercing and filled with agony that I thought my ears would burst. The heart convulsed, then disintegrated into ash. The basement fell silent, the oppressive atmosphere lifting completely. It was over. I climbed back upstairs, my body trembling with exhaustion and relief. The house felt different, lighter. I knew the shadows were truly gone this time. But as I collapsed onto the couch, a nagging thought tugged at the edge of my mind. What if the shadows weren't the only thing lurking in the darkness? Story 7. Haunting of Blackwood Manor. The first time I set foot in Blackwood Manor, the air felt thick with secrets. I inherited the estate from my great-aunt Margaret, a woman I scarcely remembered, yet the sense of obligation pulled me to this remote corner of the countryside. The manor was an imposing structure, its Gothic architecture and ivy-covered walls standing defiantly against the passage of time. As I crossed the threshold, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was trespassing on sacred ground. Among the many rooms filled with antiques and curiosities, the portrait in the hallway was the most unsettling. It depicted a stern-looking woman in period clothing, her eyes sharp and unyielding. Great-aunt Margaret had warned me about the portrait in one of her rambling letters, but I had dismissed her words as the eccentricities of an old woman. Now, standing before it, I understood her unease. The portrait seemed to watch my every move, the painted eyes following me as I made my way through the house. "Don't stare too long," whispered Mrs. Avery, the housekeeper, startling me. She was a frail woman with a soft voice, her age showing in the deep lines of her face. They say the woman in the portrait doesn't like to be watched. Who is she? I asked, trying to sound casual despite the growing tension in my chest. That's Lady Blackwood, Mrs. Avery replied, her gaze fixed on the floor. She's been here longer than any of us. Some say she never left. That night, I dreamed of Lady Blackwood. She was no longer confined to the portrait but moved freely through the manor, her presence heavy and malevolent. I woke in a cold sweat, the sensation of her eyes still lingering. Determined to uncover the truth, I spent the next few days exploring the manor's vast library. Dusty tomes and brittle pages revealed the tragic history of the Blackwood family, a lineage marred by madness and untimely deaths. It was during one of these late-night research sessions that I first heard the whispers. At first, they were faint, indistinguishable murmurs carried by the wind. But as the nights passed, they grew louder, more insistent. Leave this place, they seemed to say, a chilling command that echoed through the empty halls. One evening, while lost in a particularly engrossing diary entry, I felt a sudden drop in temperature. The candle flames flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. I turned, half expecting to see someone behind me, but the room was empty. My eyes fell upon the portrait, and I froze. The eyes were no longer just following me, they were glaring with an intensity that made my skin crawl. I backed away slowly, the diary slipping from my hands. As I retreated, a cold gust of wind blew through the room, extinguishing the candles and plunging me into darkness. Heart pounding, I stumbled to the door, desperate to escape the oppressive atmosphere. Just as I reached the threshold, I heard a voice, low and threatening, whisper my name. I stumbled into the hallway, the door slamming shut behind me with a force that rattled the old house. My breath came in ragged gasps as I leaned against the wall, trying to calm my racing heart. The manor was silent, save for the creaks and groans of the ancient structure settling into the night. The portrait of Lady Blackwood seemed even more menacing in the dim light, her eyes boring into me with an unsettling intensity. Determined to get to the bottom of the haunting, I decided to confront Mrs. Avery. She must have known more than she was letting on. I found her in the kitchen, humming an old tune as she prepared tea. The warmth and normalcy of the scene were a stark contrast to the chilling events of the previous night. Mrs. Avery, I need to know more about Lady Blackwood, I said, trying to keep the urgency out of my voice. What happened to her? Why is she still here? The housekeeper's hands trembled slightly as she set down the teapot. Some things are better left alone, dear, she replied, her eyes filled with a sorrowful wisdom. But if you insist on knowing, come sit by the fire. It's a long story. As we sat by the crackling fire, Mrs. Avery began to recount the tale of Lady Blackwood. She was a woman of great beauty and intelligence, but her life was marked by tragedy. Her husband, Lord Blackwood, was a cruel man who met a mysterious end. Lady Blackwood was accused of his murder but was never convicted. She lived out her days in isolation, tormented by the rumors and whispers of the villagers. Some say she went mad with grief and anger, her spirit forever bound to the manor. She's not at peace, Mrs. Avery concluded, her voice barely above a whisper. She's trapped between worlds, searching for justice or revenge. I believe she sees you as a threat, someone who might uncover the truth. Her words sent a chill down my spine, but they also fueled my determination. I had to find a way to communicate with Lady Blackwood's spirit, to understand her pain and perhaps help her find peace. That night, I gathered what little courage I had and decided to hold a seance. I set up a circle of candles in the drawing room, the flickering light casting long, eerie shadows. Lady Blackwood, I called out, my voice trembling. I know you're here. I want to help you. Please, show yourself. At first, there was nothing but silence. Then, the temperature in the room plummeted, and a dense, oppressive energy filled the space. The candles flickered wildly, and I could hear the whispers again, louder and more distinct. They seemed to swirl around me, a cacophony of voices crying out in anguish. Suddenly, the portrait of Lady Blackwood seemed to come to life. Her painted eyes glowed with a malevolent light, and her mouth twisted into a grimace. "You should not have come here," a voice hissed, filled with venom and despair. "You cannot save me. No one can." Before I could respond, a gust of wind extinguished the candles, plunging the room into darkness. I felt a cold hand brush against my cheek, and I stumbled backward, my heart pounding in my chest. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, and I could feel the presence of Lady Blackwood closing in on me. The days that followed were a blur of unease and sleepless nights. Each corner of Blackwood Manor seemed to hold a new shadow, a fresh whisper of fear. I knew I was on the verge of something monumental, but the weight of Lady Blackwood's presence was taking its toll on my sanity. Determined to find answers, I decided to delve deeper into the family's history, hoping to uncover the root of her torment. I found myself drawn to a small, neglected study on the top floor of the manor. It was cluttered with old documents and forgotten relics. Among the dusty papers, I discovered a collection of letters exchanged between Lady Blackwood and her husband. They painted a picture of a marriage filled with distrust and cruelty. Lord Blackwood's accusations and Lady Blackwood's pleas for understanding were heart-wrenching, revealing a relationship twisted by lies and betrayal. One letter, in particular, stood out. It was a frantic, tear-stained plea from Lady Blackwood, begging for her husband's forgiveness. She spoke of a dark secret, something she could never confess. As I read, I felt a cold draft sweep through the room, and the sound of footsteps echoed in the hallway. I was no longer alone. "Show yourself," I demanded, my voice echoing with a newfound determination. The footsteps grew louder, and the temperature dropped sharply. The door creaked open, and a shadowy figure appeared. It was Lady Blackwood, her spectral form shimmering with a sorrowful glow. Her eyes, though filled with anger, also held a deep, unspoken pain. "You seek the truth," she said, her voice ethereal and haunting. "But some truths are best left buried. You cannot change the past." "I need to know," I insisted. "What happened between you and Lord Blackwood? Why are you trapped here?" She sighed, a sound filled with centuries of despair. "He was a cruel man, driven by jealousy and madness. He accused me of witchcraft, of consorting with dark forces. In his rage, he locked me away, determined to break me. But it was he who harbored the darkness. He made a pact, a deal with something far more sinister than he could control." As she spoke, images flashed before my eyes, a shadowy figure, a dark ritual, and the twisted smile of Lord Blackwood as he sealed his fate. Lady Blackwood's spirit trembled, her form flickering like a dying flame. "He paid the ultimate price," she continued. "But his curse bound me here, a prisoner of his madness. Only the destruction of the pact can set me free. You must find it, and end this torment." With those words, she vanished, leaving me with more questions than answers. The manor seemed to close in around me, its walls whispering the secrets of the past. I knew I had to find the source of the curse, but where to begin? The thought of facing the dark forces that had ensnared the Blackwoods filled me with dread, but I couldn't turn back now. That night, I scoured the library, searching for any reference to the pact. Hours passed, and just as I was about to give up, I stumbled upon an old, leather-bound journal. It was Lord Blackwood's, filled with cryptic notes and dark incantations. The final entry detailed a ritual performed in the manor's hidden chamber, a place he referred to as the Sanctum of Shadows. Determined to end the curse, I set out to find this hidden chamber. The manor's layout was a labyrinth of twisting corridors and secret passages, but I was driven by a sense of urgency. As I descended into the bowels of the house, the air grew colder, and the whispers became more insistent, guiding me towards the sanctum. I reached a heavy, ornate door at the end of a narrow passage. My hands trembled as I pushed it open, revealing a room shrouded in darkness. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the walls were covered in strange symbols. At the center of the room lay a stone altar, stained with blood and surrounded by ancient relics. The chamber exuded a palpable malevolence, the air so cold it felt like shards of ice against my skin. As I stepped inside, the door slammed shut behind me, sealing me in darkness. The only light came from the eerie glow of the symbols etched into the walls, casting long, sinister shadows that seemed to dance in anticipation. My heart pounded in my chest as I approached the stone altar. It was covered in dark stains and strange markings, a testament to the unspeakable acts that had taken place there. Among the relics scattered around it, one object stood out, a small, intricately carved box. Its surface was adorned with runes that pulsed with a faint, ominous light. With trembling hands, I opened the box. Inside, I found a parchment covered in Lord Blackwood's handwriting. It was the pact, a binding agreement with a demonic entity, promising power in exchange for eternal servitude. The realization that this cursed document held Lady Blackwood's spirit captive filled me with a renewed sense of purpose. I had to destroy it. As I reached for the parchment, the room grew darker, and a chilling laughter echoed around me. The shadows coalesced into a towering figure, its eyes glowing with a malevolent light. It was the entity Lord Blackwood had made his pact with, now manifesting to protect its claim. "You dare challenge me?" the entity hissed, its voice like nails on a chalkboard. "You are but a mortal, incapable of comprehending the forces at play." "I will free her," I declared, my voice steadier than I felt. "Your hold on this place ends tonight." The entity lunged at me, its form shifting and writhing like a mass of serpents. I stumbled backward, clutching the parchment to my chest. The shadows pressed in, suffocating and cold, but I fought to stay focused. Recalling the ritualistic incantations I had studied, I began to chant, my voice rising above the cacophony of whispers. The entity shrieked in rage, its form flickering and distorting as the words took effect. The symbols on the walls glowed brighter, and the room trembled as if the manor itself was reacting to the battle. I could feel the power of the pact weakening, its grip loosening with each word I spoke. Suddenly, the entity howled, a sound of pure anguish. It lunged at me one final time, but I held the parchment aloft, finishing the incantation with a shout. The room exploded with light, and the shadows were torn apart, dissipating like smoke in the wind. The entity's form disintegrated, leaving behind a silence that felt almost deafening. I collapsed to the floor, exhausted but triumphant. The parchment had turned to ash in my hands, and the oppressive weight that had hung over the manor lifted. As I caught my breath, I saw her, Lady Blackwood's spirit, now radiant and at peace. She smiled, a look of profound relief and gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice a soft echo. "You have freed me." With that, she faded away, leaving me alone in the sanctum. I felt a sense of closure, but also an overwhelming sadness. The horrors of Blackwood Manor had been put to rest, but the cost had been great. As I made my way back to the surface, the first light of dawn began to filter through the windows, casting the old house in a new, hopeful light. As I left Blackwood Manor for the last time, I glanced back at the portrait in the hallway. Lady Blackwood's eyes were no longer filled with malice. They seemed to watch me with a quiet gratitude, a silent farewell to the one who had broken the curse. The end. Subscribe for more true scary stories. Thanks for watching.